Yeah, Aunt Mahara here. And in this video, I'm going to answer a comment. And so a commenter left a comment on the video that I did a while back, maybe a couple years ago. BPD relationships explained why they never work out. And by the way, just before I get into this, if you find any of the videos or if you find anything on this channel helpful and you haven't subscribed yet, please consider subscribing, hitting that notification bell. Make sure you check all so you'll be notified of all the uploads. So this commenter said, could part of the problem be that, for example, once a person with BPD, like a BPD girlfriend, ends the idealization phase, then she realizes the guy she idealized was not her type or preference? Well, this is interesting. There's a little more to the comment, but could the problem be, right, is an interesting way the commenter started, because it's like there's always a problem, isn't there? There's always a lot of problems, and really, really painful problems when you're trying to relate to someone with BPD, a BPD boyfriend or a BPD girlfriend, or if you get married and it's your wife, etc. I mean, the problems just grow exponentially over time, and sometimes longer times than others in relationships for people before, well, with many ruptures, but before the major rupture comes, and or people feel like they just can't take it anymore. Even though, as I'm always saying, you feel like you can't live without them, but you're not sure how to live with them. So let me just see here again. So could part of the problem be, right? Because so many problems. So could part of the problem be, because it's got to be something, right? And you're trying to figure out, what was it? What is it? So if you can relate to that, first of all, they don't end the idealization phase. It ends, but they don't do that consciously on purpose or pick the time or the way that they will be triggered to an emotional dysregulated state of one sort or another to one degree or another, and then they split you to devaluation, and this is maybe a more severe incident will happen for them, and then so yeah, it ends the idealization phase, because after that initial super split to devaluation, it can cause ghosting, or it could cause an outright discard. It can set up relationship recycling after that, like not on purpose, but that's what happens for so many people. After that first big split to devaluation, that is the end of the idealization phase, and they don't really idealize you again. There can seem like there's moments of that, maybe when Hoovers and this and that, but it's not really what's happening for the person with BPD. As the idealization phase is ended by a major split to devaluation, the question, is really, could the guy that a borderline girlfriend idealized just not have been, like, were you just not her type or preference? Well, no, that's not true, because people with BPD don't really have that much of a stable sense of identity and known self to really know what they do want versus what they don't want. I mean, I'm sure that they have preferences, and, people are looking for people that are really attractive to them and etc. So there'd be that going on, but it's once you get into a relationship with a borderline, and this is a man asking the question, but for women too, if you get in a relationship with a male with BPD, it's not really part of the problem that they will come to some realization after the end of the idealization phase, that they'll come to some realization that you're not their type or whatever. And why would that be? Well, because they don't really see you. They don't really hear you that much. So in a lot of ways, they don't really experience you for who you really are. That's why they don't take in and they don't recognize, and they often don't acknowledge how much you give them, how much you do for them, how you try to make everything just wonderful for them. But people with BPD can't take in the wonderful, don't trust positive things, aren't feeling good about themselves. So when that split to devaluation happens and the idealization phase is over, the least of the actual reality of what's happening, it doesn't have much to do with you at all. I mean, you've gone through it, and it's really brutally painful and horrific, but it's not because suddenly they realize that you're not their type. It's not really about you at all. And so then the commenter continues, in other words, she is out of the fantasy state in a more, quote, constant personality state. Well, first of all, when they split to devaluation, they are not necessarily, I mean, maybe the fantasy kind of crashes for them a bit, but they're not the ones with the biggest fantasy part of the fantasy bonded relationship between themselves and people who usually have codependency. It's more people with codependency that have the more experience and the bigger kind of fantasy bond, if you know what I mean. They don't really get out of a fantasy state in the devaluation. Because again, you have to remember, it's not really about you. And what do I mean about it? Well, it's about how you become a representation of a wounding parent. That's who they're experiencing you as, even though they know the difference between you and a wounding parent. So then the commenter is saying, she's out of the fantasy state. No, she's just out of the idealization phase. And in a more, quote, constant personality state, they don't have a more constant personality state. When they're out of a relationship, if they ghost you, discard you, you break up with them, they don't have any constant personality state at that point. They just might not be as triggered as often as when they're trying to be close to someone and relate with someone in a relationship. And when I say triggered, it's not you that triggered them either. It's just what happens inside of them. So there is no constant personality state, even when we put the word constant in quotes. It just doesn't apply. But once she's split to devaluation and there's been a rupture, or a more final rupture, seemingly more final rupture, those are my words, then the commenter wants to know, so now she knows that she would never have chosen that guy in her, quote, more real constant state, unquote, because she realizes he's not her type preference, and she's therefore not attracted to him enough to stick it out longer. No, this is like, I don't know if this person just thought of this, but this is very erroneous. It's not applicable. It's not true. It's not even a part of the problem. It's not even what the whole enchilada of the problem is. Why borderlines get into this split. I mean, they may have many splits to devaluation, and you may experience many ruptures in the relationship, and they don't know how to repair those ruptures, as I've been making sure to say a lot so people can understand that. But no, there's no more real constant state. They use people. They just use people and use them up. And with the borderline approach avoidance conflict, you know, that difficulty getting close, well, it doesn't seem like it in the beginning, but the difficulty getting close, then being close, the engulfment fear rises, and then they don't know how to communicate what they're feeling because they don't really understand what they're feeling. So the next thing you'll see eventually, or sooner than later, boom, you know, like split to devaluation. They're very argumentative, or if it's quiet borderline, they're very quiet, but they're just cold all of a sudden. And so that is when they're in, so it's their protection against being too close, because they don't know how really to, they have disorganized attachment, they can't really attach, they don't really commit. Nothing is constant for them at all. When they've devalued or discarded you or ghosted you, there's no more constant state. And it's not about because now they suddenly realize you're not their type, you're not the preference. It's just not about that at all. As a commenter says, because now she realizes that the person is not their type preference. No, it's not that. And she's therefore not attracted to him enough to stick it out longer. No. Because why can't they stick things out longer? Because they have disorganized attachment. They don't have a sense of self, so they have a very unstable sense of self, but essentially a lost self, not a known self. It's the approach avoidance struggle in BPD. So they want to get close. They can do that intensely in the honeymoon phase, the idealization phase, but they can't maintain it because then they have fear of engulfment. And with fear of engulfment, then they have to, like, something will rupture, they will be triggered to emotional dysregulation, whether they show that outwardly or not, are just quiet and cold, or all argumentative and nothing's good enough. And then what happens with that is, it's not that so there's that, and then when they get distance, they can feel like you abandoned them, and then they might try to pull you back. So there's big push pull. Well, at some point, just imagine you're just expanding and contracting really quickly in an elastic band. And at some point when you pull it across again and you expand it, it just snaps. And that's what happens with people with BPD. It's not like they actually snap in a sense, but it's more accurate to say they just snap. They just can't tolerate anymore the trying to get close, to go through all they're going through, that you may get externalized in ways, but you can't really understand what that's like for them. And then when they try to seek distance, they push you away, they argue, they create arguments, or they go stone cold if they're quiet, and maybe they go away and they ghost you and you don't know what's going on. So when that happens, it's not that it's because they weren't attracted to you anymore, they can't stick it out any longer. It's that you get devalued, and all the tumult and things that are going on inside the person with BPD, they feel like, well, the person closest to them has to be causing it. It has to be your fault because they're hurting badly, they're having anxiety, they're going through all kinds of different things, each person with BPD largely untreated, or until really super well treated for lots of healing and change to occur. So the thing is, it's not about preference or type, and it's not that they didn't want to stick it out longer, it's that they literally have no way to cope with it. Because you have to remember, too, that people with BPD or patterns in suspected BPD and they're untreated or not well treated, they definitely are emotionally in a very childlike place. And so in a transactional analysis type model, what I would say about this is so parent, adult, child, and what's happening a lot of the time is when you're the person, usually with codependency, with the person with BPD, then you're relating to them from your adult, and intellectually they can try to relate to you from their adult self, although they don't really know that self. But often people with BPD are going to tip into sort of the child ego state, which they don't really have a self or container of self or know that self either, but they're going to revert back, and they can get triggered to the emotional dysregulation that then includes some age regression, and they're going to be responding and reacting and trying to communicate after a rupture or in an argument or a jade conversation. They're really being emotionally very young. And so nothing they say is logical, and half of what they talk about ends up not being even about what's the rupture of the episode, what's happening now. And so with all of that, they just get to a place where they can't tolerate it anymore. They think you're doing this to them and making this happen to them, which is not true. And then, whether they think that consciously or not, that's how they react. They need to defend. They push you away, they devalue, they ghost, and or they discard. And is that final or isn't it final? It should be final. That's where people really need to go, hey, wait, I need to get out of this, right? But it's difficult. So no, when they don't stick it out longer, it has nothing to do with that you were not their type or their preference or anything like that. It's how they can't handle all that's going on inside of them, because the wounds, the core wound of BPD and the lost self and the emotional arrested development with a disorganized attachment, and how they will try to merge with people, and then you become this object other. So you're not seen and heard for who you really are. All of that, people with BPD suffer incredibly emotionally, whether they show it or not, and they don't understand what's happening inside of them. So therefore, when they project that out and then they think you're doing it to them, you're causing them to feel all this stuff, and there's just something wrong with you because they're not happy. Or you might have just given them the world, and they're like, no, but you don't really love me, and I'm not, because of what they lack inside, the self they don't know, etc. This is the hard part about understanding BPD enough to really be able to continue your healing journey or wherever you are, or if you've started one or not. And by the way, I'm out here to work with people if you resonate with me, because you need to have core foundational understandings of how little all their push-pull, approach avoidance conflict, split-it evaluation, they split-it evaluation with emotional dysregulation that's triggered, and what all that really means inside of a person who's going through this with BPD, and how much of it they don't have any idea why they're feeling what they're feeling, but it builds to a level of anxiety, panic, and for a lot of people with BPD, terror. And then, of course, they take it out on you because they're trying to externalize it out of themselves because they don't know what's happening internally. And then you hear what they say and you think, well, I just need to do this better. Oh, I can't talk about that. I just need to try harder. And no, so it has nothing to do with them now getting into any, quote, constant state of anything, even after ghosting, discard, etc. Then they won't really understand what happened, but they will just externalize and project, and to the point where, like, it's all your fault. It's not, but this is what they believe. I mean, how many people haven't you known or experienced with the person with BPD you were with? How many people think that it's all their fault? And why couldn't the borderline just stick around longer? Well, when you have nothing to do with it, and there's nothing that you can do to stop these repetition, compulsion, very common patterns in women and or men with BPD, there's nothing you can do to stop it. There's nothing they can do to stop it. And so it's not that you weren't their type, and it's not that they even tried to get in a relationship because they were lonely, but it's really complicated. And I think that people really need to think, how much do you really want to understand why it didn't work out versus what are you going to do about the fact that it didn't work out, and that it won't work out if you try it over, or you may have tried it over several times and it just doesn't work. So I hope that answered the question. It's a role reversal that they're handing you. Everything that they're going through inside, they're often not aware of what the heck's going on for them. And then they just ascribe that you're causing it and you don't really love them, and you could, but no matter if you've tried to give them the world. And so when they can't stand it anymore, how they feel, and they believe that you're doing it to them, people with BPD have really big relational issues and really a lot of fragmentation and brokenness. And unless and until they really go through a full recovery journey, they're just not relationship capable. They're just not able consistently, congruently, age appropriately relate. They have communication deficits. I've done some videos on that. Maybe I'll try to link a couple under here. So it's really important that people realize that when you've been ghosted or discarded by a borderline, and now they're your ex, and wherever you are with this right now, it wasn't your fault. And there's nothing you could have done to stop it, and there's nothing that the borderline could have done to stop it. And it's a tragedy, but it has nothing to do with type preference. They change their mind, or they have some constant state of anything after the end of the idealization phase. And by the way, as I've said before, I'll just tack on here quickly as I want to not make these too long all the time. So what people really need to realize more than I think a lot of people do realize, even though intellectually you might think about this, it's hard to get into the emotional landscape to actually break the fantasy or betrayal bond with the BPDX, and that's where people need to really get into therapy to work this out. And I've been helping people heal and recover from these relationships and codependency, etc., for 35 years now. And so each person struggles so much to understand what the heck just happened, and maybe even more so than you're taking care of yourself right now. And just know it is not your fault, and you couldn't have stopped it, and they couldn't have stopped it, and these relationships do not work out. Like, if people are untreated or not yet diagnosed with BPD, have the patterns, these relationships will never work out. And it's really sad and tragic how many people continue to try to recycle them, to get it right, to do it better, because you might be experiencing limerence, but you're so obsessed with how it was in the beginning. And even in idealization, they're not really seeing you, or it's not really as, it feels great, but what they're doing there isn't really loving you or seeing you more than they do in devaluation. And I've talked about that in other videos, and maybe I'll talk about that some more. I hope that was helpful. And people need to really get into their own processes to stop focusing on what the borderline did or why. But when the question is asked, was it because maybe you weren't their type after all, or their preference, has nothing to do with that, because it has nothing to do with actually the X's of BPD. It wasn't your fault, and it's all about what they're going to do in any and every relationship that they have. So they'll have several, because a lot of them don't last very long. And no, it's not your fault. It has nothing to do with you. It wasn't because you weren't their type or their preference.